I never imagined that Christmas dinner at the prestigious Hawthorne estate would end with my father-in-law asking me to refill the wine glasses, thinking I was one of the catering staff they'd hired for the evening. Even less could I have anticipated the deafening silence that fell over the ornate dining room when I calmly informed the Hawthorne family that as of 9 a.m. that morning, I had become the majority shareholder and new owner of Oak Ridge Country Club, the Psy, exclusive social sanctuary where 4 generations of Hawthornes had conducted their business dealings and maintained their precious social standing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But that moment, a crystal-clear confrontation that shattered years of condescension and casual cruelty, became the catalyst that not only reclaimed my dignity, but transformed me from the perpetually dismissed daughter-in-law into the powerful businesswoman they never bothered to see beyond my common origins. "Olivia, be a dear and bring another bottle of the Bordeaux from the cellar," Harrison Hawthorne said without looking up from his perfectly carved slice of prime rib. "And tell Margaret we need the dessert service prepared. The Carmichaels will be joining us for coffee in 30 minutes. 9 pairs of eyes remained fixed on their gold-rimmed plates, my husband James among them, suddenly finding his roasted potatoes utterly fascinating. We were gathered in the Hawthornes' meticulously decorated dining room, surrounded by enough old money to fund a small nation. Oil paintings of stern-faced Hawthorne ancestors watched from gilded frames, silently judging anyone who hadn't attended the right schools or possessed the right pedigree. I placed my linen napkin beside my barely touched dinner and sat perfectly still, allowing the request to hang in the air. After 4 years of marriage into the Hawthorne dynasty, this wasn't the first time Harrison or his wife Constance had mistaken me for the help. It was, however, the first time I had decided not to play along. "Harrison," I said evenly, using my father-in-law's first name deliberately, something I knew irritated him immensely. "I believe you've confused me with your household staff again." Constance Hawthorne tittered nervously, the sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, Harrison, really? That's Olivia, James's wife." She turned to me with the patronizing smile she'd perfected over decades of looking down on those she deemed inferior. "You do look rather like our new girl in that outfit, dear. Perhaps something with more color next time?" I glanced down at my elegant black dress, a Chanel I'd purchased myself with proceeds from my tech company's recent acquisition. The same acquisition none of the Hawthornes had bothered to acknowledge, despite it making headlines in the business section of every major newspaper. "I'll keep that in mind, Constance," I replied, my voice steady despite the familiar burn of indignation rising in my chest. James finally looked up, his expression caught between embarrassment and the desperate desire to avoid conflict. Father, Olivia isn't familiar with the wine cellar layout. I'll get the Bordeaux." "Nonsense," Harrison waved dismissively. "The help should know where things are. You've been coming here for 4 years now, haven't you, girl?" The way he said girl with that subtle emphasis, as if my 34 years and MBA from Stanford counted for nothing, was the final straw in a haystack of slights I'd endured since the day James had introduced me as his fiancée. I'd grown up in a modest neighborhood in Portland, the daughter of Korean immigrants who ran a small but successful grocery store. My parents had worked 16-hour days to put me through college. I'd built my cybersecurity firm from nothing but grit and brilliance, selling it for 8 figures just 3 months ago. Yet to the Hawthornes, I would forever be the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had somehow trapped their precious son. "Actually, Harrison," I said, my fingers instinctively touching the slim platinum watch on my wrist, a gift to myself after my company's IPO 2 years earlier. "I'm quite familiar with wine cellars. In fact, I've recently developed a particular interest in property management." James shot me a questioning look. We hadn't discussed my recent investments, primarily because he'd been too busy with the Hawthorne family business to ask about my sudden influx of capital or what I planned to do with it. Constance's brother Theodore, who had been silently cutting his meat with military precision, looked up with sudden interest. Property management? Planning to invest in some apartment complexes, are you? Small-scale rentals are a good starting point for beginners. The condescension was so thick I could have spread it on the dinner rolls. Theodore had famously lost millions in a failed real estate venture in the early 2000s, only to be bailed out by Harrison. Yet here he was, offering me investment advice as if I were a child with a piggy bank. Actually, I've been focusing on exclusive recreational facilities, I replied casually, taking a deliberate sip of my water. Places with historical significance and established membership bases. Harrison's sister Elaine perked up at this, her heavily jeweled fingers pausing around her wine glass. You aren't talking about that dreadful Westlake Tennis Club, are you? I hear they're letting absolutely anyone join these days. No, nothing like that, I smiled, feeling the weight of the documents I'd signed that morning in my lawyer's office. Documents that had transferred ownership of the most exclusive country club in New England into my name. I prefer establishments with more restrictive membership policies. Before I could continue, Harrison stood abruptly. Since no one seems capable of following simple instructions, I'll fetch the wine myself. He threw his napkin onto the table with unnecessary force. And, James, we need to discuss your department's quarterly numbers. They're an embarrassment to the Hawthorne name. James shrank visibly in his chair. Despite being CFO of Hawthorne Industries, he was still treated like an errant schoolboy by his father. It was this dynamic that had initially made me sympathetic to my husband. Seeing how the confident, brilliant man I'd met at a tech conference 5 years ago transformed into a shadow of himself around his family. As Harrison stormed toward the wine cellar, Constance attempted to smooth over the tension with practiced ease. Olivia, dear, I've been meaning to ask, have you considered joining the Ladies' Auxiliary Committee at Oak Ridge? It would be a wonderful opportunity for you to integrate better with our circle. What she meant, of course, was that it might teach me proper etiquette and help me blend in better with the old money families that comprised their social ecosystem. The Ladies' Auxiliary Committee was notorious for being the most judgmental collection of women in the state, responsible primarily for excluding undesirable elements from gaining membership through their husbands' business connections. That's thoughtful of you to suggest, Constance, I replied, the irony of her timing not lost on me. But I'm afraid I'll be rather busy with Oak Ridge's operations in the coming months. Management responsibilities and all that. Constance's perfectly Botoxed forehead attempted to furrow in confusion. Management? At Oak Ridge? I don't understand. The dining room door swung open as Harrison returned, a dusty bottle of Bordeaux in his hand, and a thunderous expression on his face. The most preposterous thing just happened, he announced to the table. Peterson from the club called. Says, there's some confusion about an ownership transfer that processed this morning. Apparently, someone's playing a ridiculous prank. I checked my watch again, a gesture that had become a centering mechanism whenever I needed to remind myself of what I'd accomplished on my own merit. No prank, Harrison. The paperwork was finalized at 9 a.m. I'd intended to wait until after the holidays to make the announcement, but since we're on the subject... What announcement? James asked, finally finding his voice, though it wavered with uncertainty. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 4 years of accumulated slights and dismissals fueling my resolve. As of this morning, I am the majority owner of Oak Ridge Country Club. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crackling of the Yule log in the massive fireplace seemed to pause in shock. Constance recovered first, her practiced social laugh cutting through the tension. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't be absurd, dear. Oak Ridge isn't for sale. It's been managed by a trust of founding families for over a century. It wasn't for sale to the general public, I clarified, but the trust has been quietly looking for investors for the past year. The club's finances have been mismanaged for quite some time. I looked directly at Theodore, who had served as the club's treasurer for 15 years. Hemorrhaging money, in fact. Harrison's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson. This is nonsense. The Hawthornes have been cornerstone members of Oak Ridge since 1908. We would have been informed of any sale discussions. You were, I said simply. The trustees sent notices to all founding families 6 months ago. I believe yours is still sitting unopened in the household correspondence tray in your study. Your assistant Margaret pointed it out when I mentioned it last week. The implications of that statement, that I had been planning this, that I had spoken with their household staff, that I had known about the Oak Ridge situation while they remained oblivious, seemed to hit everyone simultaneously. James turned. To me, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been dawning respect. Olivia, why would you buy Oak Ridge without discussing it with me? It was a fair question, one that cut to the heart of how distant our marriage had become. Once, we had been partners in every sense, sharing dreams, plans, ambitions. But 4 years of watching him bend to his family's expectations, of seeing him stand silently while they dismissed and diminished me, had created a gulf between us I wasn't sure could be bridged. Would it have made a difference if I had told you? I asked quietly. Would you have supported me, or would you have warned your family so they could block the sale? His silence was answer enough. Harrison slammed the wine bottle onto the table, causing everyone to flinch. This is outrageous. Whatever game you're playing, Olivia, it ends now. The Hawthorne family has maintained controlling influence at Oak Ridge for generations. Some paperwork trick won't change that. I reached for my small clutch purse, removing a folded document and sliding it across the polished mahogany. This isn't a trick, Harrison. It's a legally binding transfer of ownership. The trustees were quite motivated sellers after discovering the extent of the financial mismanagement. I paused, letting the implications sink in. The SEC might be interested in some of the accounting irregularities I found during due diligence. Theodore's face went ashen. You had no right to access those records. I had every right as a potential investor conducting proper due diligence, I corrected him. Something you might have learned in business school, if you'd actually earned your degree instead of having your father donate a building to get you admitted. Constance gasped, her hand fluttering to her throat where a flawless string of pearls rested against her silk blouse. How dare you speak to Theodore that way in this house? How dare any of you speak to me the way you have for 4 years? I countered, remaining seated and calm while chaos erupted around me. I've been called the help, the maid, the server, and that Asian girl more times than I can count. I've been seated at children's tables during family functions. I've been handed coats by guests assuming I was the checkroom attendant. And not once, has anyone in this family corrected these assumptions or defended my dignity. My gaze shifted to James, who had the decency to look ashamed. Not even my husband. James reached for my hand, but I gently pulled away. Olivia, you know I love you. It's just complicated with my family. It's actually quite simple, I replied. Respect is either present or it isn't. For 4 years, I've watched you choose your family's approval over my dignity. I've made excuses for you, for them, for the whole dynamic. But I'm done diminishing myself to make the Hawthornes comfortable with my existence. Harrison, who had been scanning the document with increasing agitation, looked up with narrowed eyes. This changes nothing. Oak Ridge is more than a property deed. It's about legacy, connections, social standing. Things you can never buy, no matter how much. Nouveau rich tech money you throw around. I smiled then, not the accommodating smile I'd perfected for Hawthorne family functions, but the confident expression I wore in boardrooms when closing multi-million-dollar deals. You're right about one thing, Harrison. Oak Ridge is about more than property. It's about power. Who has it and who doesn't? For generations, your family has used that club to determine who matters in this community and who remains on the outside. You've leveraged exclusivity to maintain your social position while contributing remarkably little of actual value. Standing slowly, I smoothed my black dress and picked up my clutch. As for what changes, well, the first members' meeting, under new ownership, is scheduled for January 15th. I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of membership criteria, fee structures, and use of club facilities. I paused, making eye contact with each shocked face around the table. I believe terms like meritocracy and diversity might feature prominently in the new Oak Ridge vision statement. Constance looked as though she might faint. You can't possibly mean to allow just anyone into Oak Ridge. Not anyone, Constance, I clarified. People of genuine accomplishment, regardless of their background or last name. The truly excellent, rather than the merely entitled. James stood, finally finding his backbone in this moment of family crisis. Olivia, surely we can discuss this privately. Whatever grievances you have with my family, Oak Ridge affects hundreds of members. You're right, I acknowledged. And they deserve better than what they've been getting. Better facilities, better financial management, and better values than what the current leadership has provided. I turned toward the door, then paused for one final observation. Oh, and Harrison? That Bordeaux you're so proud of? It's a counterfeit. The real 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild has a slightly different label design. I'm surprised a man of your refined tastes never noticed. The look of confusion that crossed his face as he examined the bottle confirmed what I'd suspected when my wine authentication app had scanned his cellar inventory last month. The Hawthornes' vaunted expertise was as hollow as their claims to superiority. As I walked out of the dining room, past the shocked household staff who had clearly heard every word through the supposedly soundproof doors, I felt a curious lightness despite the confrontation. For the first time in 4 years I had spoken, my truth without filtering it through the lens of Hawthorne expectations. Outside in the crisp December air, my driver Samuel opened the car door. All finished with dinner, Ms. Park? The question held more significance than my driver could possibly know. What destination follows the decision to reclaim your identity after years of strategic erasure? Oak Ridge Country Club, I answered without hesitation. I should see what I've just purchased. As we pulled away from the Hawthorne estate, the Christmas lights adorning the massive Georgian columns grew smaller in the rear window. The platinum watch on my wrist caught the reflection of passing streetlights, reminding me of the long journey from my parents' grocery store to this moment of reckoning. The road ahead was uncertain, likely difficult. Would my marriage survive this declaration of independence? Would the backlash from the Hawthorne empire cause collateral damage I hadn't anticipated? These questions would need answers eventually. But as we drove toward Oak Ridge, one thing became crystal clear. I was no longer allowing anyone, not even the powerful Hawthorne family, to define my worth or place in the world. That power, like the deed to their precious country club, now rested firmly in my hands. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Oak Ridge Country Club stood in stark contrast to the Hawthorne estate. While the latter showcased ostentatious old-world wealth with its imposing columns and ancestral portraits, Oak Ridge presented a more subtle elegance. Georgian architecture melded seamlessly with modern additions, creating a timeless aesthetic that whispered of privilege rather than shouting it. "Welcome to Oak Ridge, Ms. Park," said the night manager, straightening his already impeccable posture as I approached the main entrance. His use of my maiden name wasn't lost on me, nor was the fact that he didn't seem surprised by my unscheduled, late-night arrival. Word traveled fast in exclusive circles. "Thank you, Mr. Davis, ma'am. Robert Davis. I've been night manager here for 27 years. I nodded, appreciating his professionalism. "I'd like a tour, Mr. Davis. The full property, not just the areas typically shown to prospective members." If he found this request unusual, he didn't show it. "Of course, Ms. Park. Would you prefer to start with the main building or the grounds?" "The operational areas first," I decided. "Kitchens, maintenance facilities, staff quarters." Davis's eyebrows rose slightly before he schooled his expression back to perfect neutrality. In the 4 years I'd accompanied James to Oak Ridge functions, I had never once seen these behind-the-scenes areas. Members weren't supposed to concern themselves with how the magic happened, only that it did. The tour revealed exactly what I had suspected from my due diligence research. Behind the immaculate facade of Oak Ridge lay a troubling reality: outdated equipment, cramped staff facilities, and infrastructure badly in need of upgrading. The kitchen, despite producing world-class cuisine, operated with ovens from the early 1990s. The staff locker rooms were cramped and poorly ventilated. The groundskeeper's equipment shed leaked when it rained. Yet most telling were the interactions I observed between Davis and the staff we encountered on our tour. Though it was nearly midnight, the club was still active with workers preparing for the next day's events. Each employee greeted Davis with genuine respect, rather than the fearful deference I'd witnessed at Hawthorne gatherings. "You seem to have a good relationship with your team," I noted as we watched pastry chefs preparing for the following day's holiday brunch. "Oak Ridge functions because of these people," Davis replied simply, "not because of the members who barely notice them." His candor was refreshing. "And how do the trustees treat the staff?" Davis hesitated, diplomat that he was. "The trustees have priorities that don't always align with operational needs." "You mean they care more about the hand-painted wallpaper in the women's lounge than fixing the leaking roof over the maintenance shed?" A ghost of a smile crossed his professional facade. "You've done your homework, Ms. Park." "More than the Hawthornes realized," I confirmed as we continued toward the administrative offices. The club's main office revealed another layer of Oak Ridge's reality. While the member-facing areas projected timeless luxury, the back-office technology was woefully outdated. A dusty desktop computer that looked to be from the early 2000s sat on the manager's desk. "Is this what you use for member records and accounting?" I asked, unable to hide my disbelief. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Theodore Hawthorne has repeatedly denied requests for updated systems. Says the old ways are more secure." I could almost laugh at the irony. My cybersecurity firm had specialized in protecting Fortune 500 companies from sophisticated digital threats. Theodore's insistence on old ways had nothing to do with security and everything to do with keeping certain financial arrangements difficult to trace. "Mr. Davis, I'd like access to the club's financial records for the past 5 years." Again, that slight hesitation. "Those are typically only available to the trustees, Ms. Park." I removed a document from my clutch. As of 9 a.m. today, the trustee structure has been dissolved. Oak Ridge is now privately owned, with me as majority shareholder and CEO of the management company. Davis studied the document carefully, his decades of professional discretion preventing any reaction beyond a slight widening of his eyes. "I see. In that case, I'll need to access the secure storage room. Only Mr. Theodore Hawthorne has entered it in recent years." The secure storage turned out to be a glorified closet with a simple keyed lock. Inside, dozens of leather-bound ledgers lined the shelves alongside more modern financial statements and tax documents. The record-keeping system was a deliberate hodgepodge of old and new methods, difficult to reconcile and audit by design. Mr. Theodore insists on maintaining the traditional ledger system alongside computer records, Davis explained. says it's part of Oak Ridge's heritage. Or part of Theodore's strategy for financial obfuscation. What I discovered over the next 2 hours confirmed my suspicions and the findings from my initial due diligence. Oak Ridge Country Club, despite its astronomical membership fees and prestigious reputation, was in serious financial trouble. Infrastructure investments had been repeatedly deferred. Staff pension funds showed irregularities, and most damning, there were suspicious transfers to offshore accounts labeled only as special consultancy fees. "Mr. Davis, how long have you known about these issues?" I asked, after examining a particularly troubling set of entries. He stood with perfect posture near the door, hands clasped behind his back. "It's not my place to question the trustees' decisions, Ms. Park. But you've witnessed the consequences of those decisions. The leaking roofs, the outdated equipment, the staff working with inadequate facilities." For the first time, his professional mask slipped slightly. "Oak Ridge has been my life for nearly 3 decades. Many of our staff have been here even longer. Their families depend on this institution remaining stable." He hesitated before adding, "Mr. Theodore assured the department heads that the financial situation was temporary. That was 8 years ago." I closed the ledger I'd been examining. "The situation is worse than temporary, Mr. Davis. Without significant changes, Oak Ridge will be insolvent within 18 months. If this news shocked him, he didn't show it. Perhaps he'd already suspected as much. "What do you intend to do, Ms. Park?" The question wasn't accusatory but genuinely curious. For the staff of Oak Ridge, my sudden ownership represented either a threat to their way of life or a potential salvation. I considered my answer carefully. When I'd first discovered Oak Ridge was quietly seeking investors, my motivation had been, admittedly personal, a way to finally gain leverage over the Hawthorne family and their dismissive treatment. But my due diligence had revealed a deeper story, a once great institution being bled dry by the very families who claimed to be its stewards. "I intend to save Oak Ridge, Mr. Davis, not as a monument to exclusivity, but as a genuinely excellent institution that values merit over heredity." I met his gaze directly. "And I'll need honest people like you to help me do it." For the first time that night, Robert Davis smiled genuinely. "In that case, Ms. Park, there are some additional records you should see, ones Mr. Theodore doesn't know exist." Davis led me to his modest office near the staff entrance. From a locked cabinet, he removed a USB drive and several folders of meticulously organized documentation. Elena Martinez, our head accountant, has been keeping parallel records for years. When she noticed discrepancies in the official books, she began tracking everything independently. He placed the materials on his desk. She feared reporting her findings might cost her the job her family depends on. I examined Elena's detailed documentation, impressed by her thoroughness and discretion. She had effectively created a shadow accounting system that revealed the full extent of the mismanagement and potential fraud. With this evidence, there would be no way for Theodore or the other trustees to claim ignorance. "Please tell Ms. Martinez I'd like to meet with her tomorrow. Her position is not only secure, but likely due for a significant promotion." As I prepared to leave Oak Ridge in the early hours of the morning, my phone displayed multiple missed calls from James. No doubt the Hawthorne family crisis meeting was in full swing, with emergency calls to their attorneys and frantic strategizing about how to counteract my move. "Will you be requiring anything else tonight, Ms. Park?" Davis asked as we reached the main entrance. I paused, taking in the elegant facade of Oak Ridge, a place that had once represented everything I couldn't access, no matter my accomplishments. Now it was mine, not as a status symbol, but as a responsibility to the people who made it function, and the community it could potentially serve. "Yes, Mr. Davis. Please schedule a full staff meeting for tomorrow at 2 p.m. It's time everyone heard directly from the new owner about Oak Ridge's future." As my car pulled away from the club, I finally checked my messages. 27 missed calls from various Hawthorns. 3 voicemails from James, each progressively more concerned, and one text from my mother that made me smile despite the tumultuous evening. Remember what I always told you. They can only make you feel small if you give them that power. Stand tall, daughter. We are proud of you. My parents had built their grocery store from nothing, facing discrimination and hardship with quiet dignity. They had taught me that true worth came from character and contribution, not from social position or family name. It was a lesson the Hawthornes had never learned, insulated by privilege and entitlement for generations. As we drove through the sleeping town, holiday decorations twinkling in the darkness, I made a silent promise to my parents and to myself. Oak Ridge would become something different under my ownership, a place where excellence was celebrated regardless of background, where staff were valued as much as members, and where exclusivity was based on character rather than ancestry. The platinum watch on my wrist caught the passing streetlights. Once a symbol of my independent success, it now represented something more: the courage to challenge systems designed to keep outsiders like me permanently on the margins. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with resistance from those who benefited from the old order. The Hawthornes would leverage every connection and resource to regain control of their social sanctuary. But they would be facing a different Olivia Park than the one they had gradually conditioned to accept their dismissive treatment. A woman who now recognized that the greatest power lies in refusing to play by rules designed to ensure your defeat. As the iconic gates of Oak Ridge disappeared from view, I made one final decision. Whatever happened next, I would never again allow anyone to mistake me for the help, unless I chose to help on my own terms, with my full dignity intact. My phone rang at precisely 6:17 a.m. The desperate timing of the call told me everything. I needed to know about the level of panic rippling through the Hawthorne family ecosystem. Olivia, we need to talk. James's voice had that particular tension it acquired whenever he was caught between my interests and his family's expectations. It was a tone I'd grown painfully familiar with over our years together. Good morning? To you, too, I replied, already dressed and reviewing Elena Martinez's meticulous shadow accounting records at my home office desk. I'd slept barely 3 hours but felt more energized than I had in months. I assume the Family War Council ran quite late. His sigh carried through the line, heavy with exhaustion and frustration. This isn't a joke, Olivia. My father has already contacted the family attorneys. They're preparing to challenge the sale on multiple grounds. I'm sure they are, I replied calmly, highlighting another suspicious transaction in Theodore's records. That would be a mistake, but the Hawthornes have never been particularly good at recognizing when they're outmatched. Outmatched? The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. Olivia, you're talking about a family with connections throughout the state judiciary, banking system, and local government. My great-grandfather literally has a courthouse named after him. I set down my highlighter and gave the conversation my full attention. James, I know the Hawthorne mythology by heart. I've been subjected to it at every family gathering for 4 years. But there's something your family doesn't seem to understand about me, even after all this time. What's that? He asked, caution evident in his tone. I don't make moves I haven't thoroughly gamed out. I pulled up the comprehensive dossier my legal team had prepared before the Oak Ridge acquisition. The club's trustees were desperate to sell because they're facing potential criminal liability for financial mismanagement. My purchase agreement included clauses that shield me from prior improprieties, while providing the trustees limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation with financial recovery efforts. I could almost hear him processing this information. What kind of improprieties are we talking about? The kind that involve offshore accounts, pension fund irregularities, and tax evasion, I answered directly. The kind your Uncle Theodore has been orchestrating for at least 8 years. Silence stretched across the line before James finally responded, his voice quieter now. You're saying Uncle Theodore was embezzling from Oak Ridge? Among other things. The forensic accountants will determine the full extent, but the preliminary evidence is damning. I hesitated before adding the most difficult part. And it appears your father was aware of at least some of the irregularities. His signature appears on several questionable authorizations. The sharp intake of breath told me this revelation had landed exactly as expected. James had always placed his father on a pedestal, viewing Harrison Hawthorne as the embodiment of business acumen and integrity. Learning that the family patriarch had potentially been complicit in financial wrongdoing would shake the very foundation of James's worldview. "That's impossible," he finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. "My father would never—" "Your father would never need to embezzle funds," I agreed, softening my tone slightly. "But he might look the other way while Theodore did, especially if it meant avoiding a scandal that would tarnish the precious Hawthorne name." Another silence, longer this time. I could practically see James pacing our bedroom at his parents' estate, running his hand through his hair the way he did when deeply troubled. "What are you planning to do with this information?" he finally asked. It was a revealing question, not about whether the allegations were true, but about how I intended to use them. Even now, his first concern was protecting family reputation rather than addressing potential wrongdoing. "That depends entirely on how your family chooses to proceed," I replied evenly. "If they challenge my purchase or attempt to interfere with my management of Oak Ridge, I'll have no choice but to ensure these records reach the appropriate regulatory authorities. If they step back and allow me to implement the necessary reforms, I'm inclined to handle the financial recovery privately." "You're blackmailing my family." The accusation hung between us, laden with all the complex dynamics of our failing marriage. "I'm offering a choice between public accountability and private redemption," I corrected him. "Your family has operated by their own rules for generations, believing their status placed them beyond consequences. I'm simply introducing them to the concept that actions have repercussions, regardless of one's last name." James was quiet for so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice held a distant quality I hadn't heard before. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Olivia." The statement struck deeper than I'd anticipated, perhaps because it contained a painful truth. The woman he had, married, accommodating, eager to be accepted, willing to endure slights for the sake of matrimonial harmony, had indeed disappeared. In her place stood someone more aligned with the person I had been before the Hawthorne influence had begun. Its subtle erosion of my identity. "I'm the woman I've always been, James. You just never paid enough attention to notice." After ending the call, I returned to my review of the Oak Ridge records. By 8 a.m., I had identified enough financial irregularities to justify a complete audit. By 9 a.m., I had spoken with my legal team about the potential ramifications of Theodore's actions. By 10 a.m., I had outlined a comprehensive recovery plan that would stabilize the club's finances while minimizing disruption to its operations. The full extent of the Hawthorne family's response became clear at 11:37 a.m. when my assistant forwarded an email from Harrison's attorneys. They were seeking an emergency injunction to halt any changes to Oak Ridge operations pending review of the irregular and potentially fraudulent sales process. The irony of Harrison Hawthorne citing fraud concerns wasn't lost on me. Nevertheless, the legal maneuver was exactly what I had anticipated. The reflexive response of a powerful family accustomed to using the judicial system as a private enforcement mechanism for their interests. They filed with Judge William Carlton. My attorney Diane Zhang informed me during our call. He's played golf with Harrison for 20 years and their children attended the same private schools. Of course they did, I replied, unsurprised by the Hawthornes' attempt to leverage their social connections. What's our response? We've already filed a motion to have the case reassigned due to conflict of interest, Diane explained. More importantly, we've submitted a comprehensive evidence package documenting the financial irregularities at Oak Ridge under Hawthorne stewardship. I smiled at her thoroughness. Diane and I had worked together since my tech company's early days. Like me, she had faced barriers in her career due to being both female and Asian American in a field dominated by white men. Unlike me, she had never bothered trying to accommodate those who underestimated her, preferring instead to systematically dismantle their assumptions through impeccable legal strategy. They'll claim the financial issues are precisely why the sale should be reviewed, I noted. They might try, but they'd be walking into a trap, Diane replied. Their emergency filing claims the sale was conducted without proper notice to stakeholders. Our evidence shows Harrison personally received and acknowledged the investment opportunity notification 6 months ago. We have the certified mail receipt with his signature. Another example of the Hawthorne arrogance that had created this vulnerability. Harrison had likely received the notice and dismissed it without reading, confident that nothing important could happen at Oak Ridge without his explicit approval. That same overconfidence had prevented him from noticing my growing interest in the club's operations over the past year. "What about Theodore?" I asked. "Has he made any moves yet?" "He's gone remarkably quiet," Diane noted. "No legal filings, no public statements. According to our sources, he canceled his flight to Aspen this morning and has been holed up at his lake house making calls. Theodore's retreat to his secondary residence rather than rallying with the family at the Hawthorne estate was telling. He was distancing himself, perhaps already seeking to establish plausible deniability for whatever financial irregularities might come to light. He knows the records won't withstand scrutiny, I concluded. He's preparing his own defense separate from the family's. The Hawthornes had always presented a united front to the outside world, maintaining the illusion of familial harmony regardless of internal conflicts. Theodore's decision to break from this pattern indicated he recognized the severity of his situation and possibly the futility of Harrison's legal challenge. As noon approached, I prepared for my first official visit to Oak Ridge as its owner. The staff meeting scheduled for 2 p.m. would set the tone for everything that followed. The employees deserved transparency about the transition and reassurance about their futures, especially after years of uncertainty under the trustees' mismanagement. My driver Samuel pulled up to my downtown condo precisely at 12:30. "To Oak Ridge, Miss Park?" "Not directly," I decided. "There's a stop I'd like to make first." 20 minutes later, we pulled into the modest parking lot of Park Family Market, the grocery store my parents had operated for 30 years in a working-class neighborhood on the city's east side. Though they had retired 5 years earlier, selling the business to a young couple who had maintained its community-focused approach, I still felt a sense of homecoming whenever I visited. Inside, the familiar sense of fresh produce and my mother's signature kimchi recipe welcomed me. Mrs. Kim, the new owner, waved enthusiastically from behind the register. "Olivia, what a wonderful surprise! Your parents just left for their senior center lunch program." I smiled, moving through the aisles with practiced ease. This store had been my second home throughout childhood. I'd stocked these shelves, operated that register, and helped countless customers navigate their shopping lists in both English and Korean. Every success in my life had grown from the foundation my parents had built in this unpretentious space. "Actually, I was hoping to pick something up," I explained. "Do you still carry the banchan containers my mother used to prepare?" "Of course. Your mother's recipes are still our best sellers." I selected several containers of the traditional Korean side dishes my mother had introduced to the neighborhood decades ago. Dishes that had gradually won over even the most culinarily conservative customers through their authentic flavors, and my mother's warm insistence that everyone at least try a sample. As Mrs. Kim rang up my purchases, she studied me with the familiar directness of someone who had known me since childhood. "You look different today," she observed. "More like your mother." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of her eyes. "You have her determination face. The one she wore when dealing with difficult suppliers or standing up to that health inspector who tried to cite us for serving exotic foods. She handed me the bag. Whatever you're facing, I almost feel sorry for the other side. The observation stayed with me as we drove to Oak Ridge. I had spent years attempting to fit into the Hawthorne world, modulating my speech, adjusting my appearance, even distancing myself from cultural traditions to avoid giving them another reason to see me as an outsider. All while the strength I needed had been modeled for me throughout my life by parents who had never compromised their dignity, despite facing far greater obstacles than I ever had. Oak Ridge Country Club presented a different atmosphere in daylight. Members moved across the meticulously maintained grounds with the casual entitlement of those accustomed to exclusive access. A group of older men occupied the main terrace, holding court over their afternoon scotch as they had likely done for decades. Women in tennis whites chatted by the pro shop, designer bags casually displayed like tribal identifiers. I entered through the main entrance rather than the staff access I'd used the previous night. The difference in reception was immediate and revealing. "I'm sorry, miss. The service entrance is around the back," said the young man at the reception desk without looking up from his computer. It was a familiar dismissal, one I'd experienced numerous times as James's wife. The assumption that I couldn't possibly be a member, despite my designer clothing and professional demeanor, spoke volumes about the club's ingrained biases. "I'm not staff," I replied calmly. "I'm Olivia Park, the new owner." His head snapped up, eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Ms. Park, I'm so sorry. We received the memo about new ownership, but I didn't expect. That is, we weren't informed you'd be visiting personally." "Clearly," I said, not unkindly. "Is Mr. Davis available?" "Yes, ma'am. He's preparing for the staff meeting in the Crystal Ballroom. Would you like me to escort you?" "That won't be necessary. I know the way." The path to the ballroom took me through Oak Ridge's main dining room, where several members were enjoying late lunches. The conversation stopped as I passed, replaced by the unmistakable buzz of whispered speculation. News of the ownership. Change had clearly spread through the membership, though probably in the form of rumors rather than official communication. I recognized several faces from Hawthorne social gatherings, the same people who had often mistaken me for serving staff, or simply ignored my presence entirely. Their expressions now ranged from confusion to apprehension as they watched me walk confidently through what they had always considered their exclusive domain. The Crystal Ballroom had been transformed from its usual formal dining arrangement to an assembly setup, with chairs organized in rows facing a small podium. Staff members were already filing in, kitchen workers still in their whites, groundskeepers in their uniforms, administrative personnel in business attire. The social hierarchy of Oak Ridge was plainly visible in how they segregated themselves, each department claiming specific sections of the room. Robert Davis approached as I entered. "Ms. Park, I wasn't expecting you until closer to the meeting time. I wanted to get the lay of the land first," I explained, "and to speak with you and Ms. Martinez privately before addressing everyone." He nodded, leading me to a small anteroom where a woman in her 50s waited, her posture straight, but her fingers nervously adjusting the folders before her. Elena Martinez had the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to observing without being noticed, a quality that had likely served her well while documenting Theodore's financial manipulations. "Ms. Martinez," I greeted her, extending my hand. "Thank you for your meticulous record-keeping. Your documentation has been invaluable." She shook my hand firmly, her initial nervousness giving way to professional dignity. "I only did what was necessary, Ms. Park. The staff pension fund discrepancies couldn't be ignored, not when so many families depend on those benefits." Her straightforward explanation revealed more about her character than any resume could have. Elena Martinez hadn't been motivated by personal gain or power plays. She had acted to protect those with even less power than herself. "I've reviewed your records," I told her, "and I'd like to offer you a new position effective immediately. Chief Financial Officer of Oak Ridge Operations, reporting directly to me. Her eyes widened slightly. Mr. Theodore has always insisted that financial oversight remain with the trustees. Mr. Theodore no longer has any authority at Oak Ridge, I replied simply. The trustees have been dissolved, and the club's financial management will now adhere to proper corporate governance standards. Davis cleared his throat. Speaking of Mr. Theodore, he arrived about 20 minutes ago and is currently in the trustees' private lounge. He's demanding access to the financial records room. This was an unexpected development. Theodore's presence at Oak Ridge today, when he must surely know about the staff meeting and ownership transition, suggested either remarkable arrogance or desperate damage control. Has he been granted access? I asked. No, ma'am. As per your instructions, all access protocols have been updated. The records room remains secured. Good. Please inform security that Mr. Theodore is to be treated as a regular member, not as a trustee. He has no special access privileges beyond standard membership. As Davis left to relay the instructions, Elena leaned forward slightly. Ms. Park, there's something you should know about today's meeting. Many staff members are frightened about what your ownership means for their positions. The Hawthornes have already spread rumors about mass layoffs and restructuring. Of course, they have, I sighed. The Hawthornes would naturally attempt to position me as a corporate raider rather than a reformer. Thank you for telling me. I'll address those concerns directly. By 2 p.m., the ballroom was filled with approximately 150 staff members representing all aspects of Oak Ridge's operations. The tension in the room was palpable, the mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and cautious hope that accompanies leadership transitions, especially unexpected ones. I placed the containers of banchan I'd purchased at my parents' former store on a small table near the podium, then took my position at the front of the room. No elaborate introduction, no fanfare. Just direct engagement. Good afternoon, I began, surveying the diverse faces before me. My name is Olivia Park. As of yesterday morning, I became the majority owner of Oak Ridge Country Club. I imagine you have many questions about what this means for you and for the institution you serve. I'll do my best to address those concerns today. I paused, noting how many employees were avoiding direct eye contact, a learned behavior in environments where being noticed by authority figures often meant criticism, rather than recognition. But first, I want to acknowledge something important. Oak Ridge exists because of your expertise, dedication, and hard work. While members may see only the results of your efforts, I recognize that this institution's true value lies in the people who maintain its excellence day after day. A subtle shift occurred in the room, a slight straightening of postures, a few more direct gazes. I've spent the past 24 hours reviewing Oak Ridge's operations, financial status, and organizational structure. What I've found is both concerning and promising. The concerning part is that this institution has been systematically underinvesting in both its infrastructure and its people. The promising part is that despite these challenges, you have maintained remarkable standards through your commitment and ingenuity. Elena Martinez nodded slightly from her seat in the front row, while Davis maintained his professional neutrality despite the unprecedented nature of this direct communication from ownership to staff. Let me address the rumors directly. There will be no mass layoffs. On the contrary, my assessment indicates that several departments are understaffed relative to operational requirements. There will be changes, yes, but they will be aimed at strengthening Oak Ridge, not diminishing it. The relief in the room was almost tangible, shoulders relaxing and whispered conversations breaking out in small pockets. The most immediate changes will involve infrastructure investments, technology upgrades, and workplace improvements. The leaking roof over the maintenance shed will be fixed next week. The kitchen will receive the equipment upgrades that have been repeatedly deferred. And the staff facilities will be renovated to the same standard we maintain for member areas. A groundskeeper in the back row raised his hand tentatively. When I nodded in his direction, he stood. "Ms. Park, we've heard these promises before, from the trustees. What makes your plans different?" It was a fair question, delivered with the wariness of someone who had learned to distrust management commitments. "The difference, Mr. Jackson, Thomas Jackson, head groundskeeper for the past 17 years. The difference, Mr. Jackson, is that my promises come with immediate action and transparent accountability." I gestured to Elena. "Ms. Martinez has been appointed Chief Financial Officer with a mandate to ensure that resources are allocated appropriately and that financial commitments are honored. Starting next week, department heads will receive regular budget updates and will participate in planning decisions affecting their areas." Another hand raised, this time from a woman in food service attire. "What about the membership policies? There's talk that you plan to change who can join Oak Ridge." This question touched on the aspect of my plans that would likely generate the most resistance from existing members. It deserved a candid response. "Oak Ridge will continue to be an exclusive institution," I confirmed, "but exclusivity will be redefined based on character, contribution, and commitment, rather than family connections or social pedigree. The racial and gender restrictions that have existed unofficially in admissions processes will end immediately." A murmur ran through the room. Though never formally codified in the club's bylaws, Oak Ridge's membership had remained overwhelmingly white and male through carefully controlled nomination and approval processes. Additionally, I continued, every staff member who has served Oak Ridge for 5 years or more will be eligible for a special category of honorary membership, providing access to club facilities during designated hours. This announcement generated the first audible gasp of the meeting. The idea that staff might use the same facilities they maintained represented a fundamental shift in Oak Ridge's social hierarchy. "Ms. Park," a new voice spoke from the back of the room. Theodore Hawthorne stood in the doorway, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "This meeting is inappropriate and premature. The ownership transfer is being legally challenged as we speak." His interruption created an immediate freeze in the room's atmosphere, staff members instinctively tensing at the presence of a Hawthorne during what had felt like a momentary reprieve from hierarchical pressure. "Mr. Hawthorne," I acknowledged, calmly. "You're welcome to join us as a member, but this is an operational meeting between management and staff. Your trustee status has been dissolved along with the trust itself." Theodore entered the room fully, falling back on the authoritative presence that had intimidated Oak Ridge employees for decades. "These people work for Oak Ridge, and Oak Ridge has been in Hawthorne stewardship for generations. Whatever game you're playing with these promises and policy changes, it won't stand." I maintained my position at the podium, refusing to cede the cabourcy, physical or psychological ground he was attempting to reclaim. "The only game being played at Oak Ridge involved financial mismanagement under your direction, Mr. Hawthorne, a situation I'm currently working with regulatory authorities to resolve." The color drained from his face. "You have no right—" "I have every right as the legal owner of this institution," I interrupted. "Now, you can either take a seat and observe this meeting respectfully, or you can leave. Those are your only options." In the stunned silence that followed, I turned my attention back to the staff, deliberately dismissing Theodore's presence. "Before we continue, I brought something to share." I gestured to the containers on the small table. "These are traditional Korean side dishes called banchan. My mother made these recipes famous in our family's grocery store, converting even the most reluctant customers into regular patrons." I removed the lids, revealing colorful arrangements of kimchi, marinated spinach, pickled radishes, and other traditional preparations. In Korean culture, sharing food is a way of building community. I invite you all to try these during our break. They represent something important about the future of Oak Ridge, a willingness to embrace new experiences while honoring tradition and craftsmanship. Theodore remained frozen near the back of the room. his authority effectively neutralized not through confrontation but through irrelevance. The staff, initially uncertain, gradually relaxed again as I continued outlining concrete plans for Oakridge's transformation. By the meeting's end, the atmosphere had shifted from apprehension to cautious optimism. Staff members approached the banchan table, first tentatively and then with genuine interest, creating an informal reception that broke down departmental barriers as they discussed the unfamiliar flavors and shared reactions. I moved among them, learning names, listening to concerns, and answering questions directly rather than through managerial intermediaries. This approach, engaging with staff as valued contributors rather than subordinates, represented exactly the cultural shift Oakridge needed. As the gathering gradually dispersed, Davis approached with an update. Mr. Theodore left about halfway through the banchan sampling. He appeared distressed. I imagine he did, I replied. His world is changing in ways he never anticipated. I watched as the last staff members departed, many taking their plates of banchan with them to share with colleagues who had been unable to attend. Please arrange a meeting with the membership committee for tomorrow morning. It's time to address the other side of the Oakridge equation. Davis nodded, understanding the implications. The membership committee is chaired by Mrs. Constance Hawthorne. She's unlikely to cooperate with reform initiatives. Then she'll have the opportunity to resign her position, I replied simply. Oakridge is moving forward with or without Hawthorne participation. As I prepared to leave, Elena Martinez approached with a folder containing preliminary budget adjustments for the infrastructure improvements I'd promised. Her efficiency confirmed that I'd made the right choice in promoting her. Ms. Park, she said hesitantly after we'd reviewed the numbers, may I ask a personal question? Of course. Why did you really buy Oakridge? There must have been less complicated investments available to someone with your resources. It was a perceptive question, one that cut to the heart of my motivations. Beyond the surface narrative of business opportunity or personal vendetta against the Hawthornes. My parents came to this country with nothing but their determination and work ethic, I explained. For 30 years, they served a community that initially viewed them with suspicion and sometimes hostility. They never compromised their dignity, never apologized for their identity, and never stopped believing they deserved respect regardless of their accent or origin. I closed the budget folder, meeting her gaze directly. I bought Oakridge because institutions like this have defined who belongs and who doesn't in American society for generations. Those definitions have systematically excluded people like my parents, like me, and probably like you, regardless of our contributions or character. Elena nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. The Hawthornes see Oakridge as their hereditary right, I continued. I see it as an opportunity to redefine excellence in a way that honors merit rather than inheritance. That seems like an investment worth making, complicated or not. As I walked through Oakridge's grand entrance, passing the same reception desk where I'd been mistakenly directed to the service entrance hours earlier, I felt a profound sense of alignment between my parents' legacy and my own emerging path. The grocery store and the country club represented opposite ends of the American social spectrum, yet both could serve as platforms for dignity, community, and authentic value, if guided by the right principles. My phone buzzed with a notification. Harrison Hawthorne's emergency injunction request had been denied by the court, with the judge citing insufficient evidence of impropriety in the sales process and substantial concerns about previous management practices that warranted further investigation. The first significant legal challenge had failed, just as I had anticipated. But the Hawthornes had built their influence over generations. They would not surrender their social sanctuary without deploying every resource at their disposal. The AC. Battle for Oakridge's future was just beginning, and with it, the larger contest between inherited privilege and earned merit that would define not just a country club, but the community it served. The membership committee meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in Oak Ridge's mahogany-paneled boardroom, a space deliberately designed to intimidate through its imposing architecture and historical gravitas. Portraits of founding members, all white, men with stern expressions, lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow visitors with aristocratic disapproval. I arrived at 8:30 to find the room empty, except for Robert Davis, who was arranging folders at each seat around the massive table. "Good morning, Ms. Park," he greeted me. "The committee members have been notified of the meeting, though I should warn you that several have expressed reservations about attending." "By reservations, you mean the Hawthornes have organized a boycott?" I translated, setting my briefcase on the table. Davis's expression remained professionally neutral. "Mrs. Constance Hawthorne called several committee members yesterday evening. I can't speak to the content of those conversations, but traditionally, when a Hawthorne makes requests, Oak Ridge committees comply." I nodded, unsurprised by this development. "How many members are on the committee?" 7 in total. Mrs. Hawthorne is chair, plus 6 others who represent various factions among the membership. "And how many do you expect will actually attend?" Davis hesitated. "Based on the responses I've received, perhaps 2, in addition to yourself." It was exactly the scenario I had anticipated. Constance would leverage her social authority to create the impression of unified resistance, isolating anyone who dared to engage with the new ownership. It was a strategy that had likely served the Hawthornes well in previous conflicts, relying on conformity pressure and fear of social exclusion. "That will be sufficient," I assured him. "Please arrange coffee service for 8 people regardless." At precisely 9 a.m., the boardroom door opened to admit an elderly gentleman leaning heavily on a wooden cane. Judge William Porter, retired. From the federal bench at 82, had been a fixture at Oak Ridge for over 50 years. Though his physical mobility had diminished, his sharp legal mind and even sharper tongue remained legendary in judicial circles. "Ms. Park," he acknowledged, with a courtly nod. "I've been looking forward to this meeting, despite Constance Hawthorne's rather heavy-handed suggestion that I develop a sudden case of seasonal flu." I smiled, extending my hand. "Judge Porter, thank you for coming. Your reputation for integrity precedes you, as does yours for disrupting calcified systems," he replied with unexpected warmth. "My granddaughter works at your former company. She speaks highly of the cultural transformation you implemented there." This personal connection was unexpected, but welcome. It reminded me that even within established institutions like Oak Ridge, individual members might have perspectives that diverged from the dominant hierarchy. A moment later, the door opened again to admit Dr. Amara Richardson, a cardiologist whose groundbreaking research had earned her international recognition. As one of the few Black women granted Oak Ridge membership through her husband's family connections, she had navigated the club's social politics with graceful determination for nearly a decade. "Good morning," she greeted us, her gaze taking in the empty chairs. "I see Constance's influence campaign has been effective." "Not with everyone," Judge Porter noted pointedly. Dr. Richardson smiled. "Some of us have faced too many boycotts to be intimidated by them. Besides, I'm rather curious about Ms. Park's vision for this institution." At 9:15, with no additional committee members in attendance, I decided to begin. "Thank you both for coming. I appreciate your willingness to engage constructively despite the obvious pressure not to." Judge Porter waved his hand dismissively. "The Hawthornes mistake longevity for authority. My family has been members here since 1914, and I've witnessed 3 generations of Hawthorne attempts to control this institution as a private fiefdom. The membership committee has operated primarily as a gatekeeping mechanism," Dr. Richardson added. "I agreed to serve last year, hoping to advocate for greater diversity, but every candidate I've proposed has been rejected for increasingly nebulous reasons." Their candid assessments confirmed what my due diligence had suggested about Oak Ridge's governance culture. The formal structures existed mainly to maintain the appearance of democratic processes, while actual authority remained concentrated among established families. I've called this meeting to discuss significant changes to Oak Ridge's membership policies, I explained, distributing folders containing my proposed reforms. These changes will reflect a shift from hereditary privilege to merit-based inclusivity, while maintaining the exclusivity that defines Oak Ridge's character. Judge Porter adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the document with practiced efficiency. Removal of legacy preferences, transparent application criteria, blind review, process. He looked up with raised eyebrows. These would fundamentally transform the membership demographics within a single generation. That's the intention, I confirmed. Oak Ridge will continue to be selective, but selection will be based on character, contribution, and commitment, rather than family connections or social networks. Dr. Richardson was reviewing the section on diversity initiatives, a scholarship program for promising individuals from underrepresented communities, mentorship pathways, community engagement requirements for existing members. She met my gaze with cautious hope. This is ambitious. It's necessary, I replied, both ethically and financially. Oak Ridge has been subsidizing exclusivity at the expense of excellence. That model isn't sustainable in either moral or economic terms. For the next hour, we discussed the implementation details of these reforms, benefiting from Judge Porter's legal expertise and Dr. Richardson's perspective. As someone who had experienced Oak Ridge's exclusive culture from a marginalized position, their insights strengthened the proposals, identifying potential resistance points and suggesting strategic approaches to overcome them. As our discussion concluded, Dr. Richardson asked the question that surely lingered in both committee members' minds. The existing membership will resist these changes vigorously. The Hawthornes in particular will leverage every connection to maintain the status quo. Are you prepared for that battle? Before I could respond, the boardroom door burst open. Constance Hawthorne stood in the entrance, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit that matched her icy demeanor. Behind her hovered the remaining committee members, their expressions caught between embarrassment and defiance. I see the meeting proceeded without proper quorum, Constance announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to defining social rules. Any decisions made are therefore invalid under committee bylaws. Judge Porter turned in his seat. The bylaws require 3 members for quorum, Constance. Ms. Park, Dr. Richardson, and myself constitute a valid voting body. Constance's perfectly composed features tightened slightly. Ms. Park is not a committee member. She is simply the temporary owner dealing with administrative matters. As owner, I'm ex officio on all Oak Ridge committees, I corrected her. That provision dates back to the original club charter of 1887, as I'm sure you're aware. The slight widening of Constance's eyes confirmed she had not, in fact, been aware of this historical detail, an oversight that revealed the superficial nature of the Hawthornes' understanding of the institution they claimed to steward. We've completed our business, I continued, gathering my materials. The membership policy reforms have been approved by unanimous committee vote. Implementation begins immediately, with official notification to all members by close of business today. One of the committee members who had arrived with Constance, a nervous man whose family wealth derived from railroad investments, stepped forward. This is highly irregular. Major policy changes typically require review by the full membership. Under normal circumstances, perhaps, Judge Porter interjected. But the club's bylaws grant the membership committee full authority during ownership transitions, a provision originally insisted upon by Harrison Hawthorne Sr. in 1978, as I recall. The historical irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The very mechanisms the Hawthornes had established to consolidate their influence were now being used to implement reforms they opposed. Constance's social mask slipped momentarily, revealing the fury beneath her carefully maintained composure. This is a hostile takeover of a cultural institution. The founding families will not stand for it. I met her gaze steadily. This isn't a takeover, Constance. It's a restoration of merit, integrity, and genuine excellence. Values that have been gradually eroded under Hawthorne influence. As the committee members absorbed this direct challenge to decades of established hierarchy, Dr. Richardson rose from her seat. I fully support these reforms and am proud to have participated in their development. Oak Ridge deserves leadership that recognizes its potential beyond preserving privilege. Her public endorsement created a visible ripple among the committee, members who had boycotted the meeting. The unified resistance Constance had carefully orchestrated was already showing cracks. Judge Porter and Dr. Richardson have graciously agreed to co-chair the implementation committee, I announced. They'll be reaching out to select members for participation in the transition process. This strategic move further undermined Constance's authority. By elevating respected figures from different factions within the membership, I was creating alternative power centers beyond Hawthorne control. Constance recognized the maneuver for what it was. Her voice dropped to the dangerous purr she reserved for social executions. Olivia, dear, you've made a grave miscalculation. Oak Ridge isn't merely a property deed, it's an ecosystem of relationships, built over generations. Relationships you'll never access, regardless of what documents you signed. It was the same threat Harrison had made at Christmas dinner, the implicit reminder that Hawthorne's social power extended beyond formal authority structures. Once, such a threat would have intimidated me into retreat. Now it merely confirmed the necessity of my reforms. You're right about one thing, Constance, I replied. Oak Ridge is more than a property. It's a community that should reflect the best values of its members, not just the longest memberships. That transformation begins today. As I left the boardroom, Davis fell into step beside me. The news will spread quickly, he observed. The Hawthornes won't surrender their influence without deploying every resource at their disposal. I'm counting on it, I replied. Their resistance will reveal exactly who they are and what they truly value about this institution. By noon, Oak Ridge was buzzing with the news of the membership reforms. Some members responded with predictable outrage, threatening to resign in protest. Others maintained strategic neutrality, waiting to see which faction would ultimately prevail. And a surprising number expressed cautious support, particularly younger members who had chafed under the rigid social hierarchies their parents and grandparents had enforced. The Hawthorne counteroffensive began at 2:17 p.m. when my phone lit up with a call from James. I answered while reviewing the implementation timeline with Elena Martinez in my temporary office. The family is in crisis mode, James said without preamble. Father has called in favors from 3 bank presidents to review Oak Ridge's outstanding loans. Mother has activated her social network to organize a membership exodus. Even grandfather has emerged from semi-retirement to contact his political connections. All expected responses, I replied calmly. Though they'll find the loan agreements less vulnerable than they anticipate, thanks to the refinancing I completed last week. The silence that followed suggested this information had caught James by surprise. You refinanced Oak Ridge's debt? When? How? Through my venture capital connections, I explained. The terms are significantly more favorable than the predatory rates Theodore had locked the club into with his golf buddies at First National. Another silence. Longer this time. Olivia, what exactly are you doing? Is this about my family's treatment of you? Because if it is, there are less destructive ways to address those issues. The question reflected James's persistent misunderstanding of my motivations, his inability to see beyond interpersonal dynamics to the systemic issues at stake. This isn't about revenge, James. It's about transformation. Oak Ridge has operated as a closed system that reinforces unearned privilege while excluding genuine merit. That model isn't just morally indefensible, it's economically unsustainable. So this is a business decision? His tone suggested he found this explanation even less believable. It's a values decision with business implications, I clarified. The question is whether you're prepared to align with those values or remain tethered to a system that diminishes everyone involved, including you. James had always existed in the uncomfortable space between his family's expectations and his own suppressed individuality. For years, I had watched him surrender his perspectives and principles to maintain Hawthorne approval, sacrificing authentic connection in pursuit of a validation that remained perpetually out of reach. "I need time to think," he finally said. "This situation is complicated." "Take all the time you need," I replied gently. "But remember that neutrality in this context isn't truly neutral. It's an endorsement of the status quo." After ending the call, I turned my attention to the next phase of Oak Ridge's transformation. With membership reforms underway, the operational restructuring could proceed more rapidly. Elena's financial expertise combined with Davis's institutional knowledge provided the foundation for a comprehensive modernization plan that would address years of neglected infrastructure while optimizing member services. As afternoon transitioned to evening, Davis reported that Harrison Hawthorne had arrived and was demanding an immediate meeting. "He's in the main lobby, refusing to leave until you speak with him." I considered my options. Avoiding direct confrontation might seem prudent, but it would also signal weakness to the Oak Ridge community watching this power transition unfold. "I'll meet him in the Heritage Room. Please ensure we have privacy, but remain nearby." The Heritage Room was traditionally reserved for Oak Ridge's most significant negotiations and confidential discussions. Its soundproofed walls and discreet entrance had hosted everything from corporate mergers to political alliances over the club's lengthy history. It was also, ironically, the room where I had first been mistaken for staff during a Hawthorne family event 3 years earlier. Harrison Hawthorne stood by the fireplace when I entered, his imposing figure silhouetted against decorative flames that provided ambiance without actual warmth, an apt metaphor for the man himself. "Ms. Park," he acknowledged, deliberately using my maiden name rather than Hawthorne. "This charade has gone far enough." I remained near the door, maintaining both physical and psychological distance. "There's no charade, Harrison. Only legitimate business decisions based on thorough due diligence and strategic planning. You've manipulated a temporary financial situation to seize control of an institution you could never access through proper channels," he countered, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that had intimidated business competitors for decades. "The Hawthorne family has maintained Oak Ridge's standards for generations. We understand its cultural significance in ways you simply cannot." The familiar dismissal might once have triggered my defensive insecurities. Now it merely confirmed the righteousness of my mission. "By proper channels, you mean the social gatekeeping mechanisms that preserve exclusivity regardless of merit. By standards, you mean the unwritten rules that maintain homogeneity despite changing demographics. And by cultural significance, you mean Oak Ridge's function as a venue for perpetuating established power structures." Harrison's expression darkened. "Your progressive reimagining of a private club's legitimate selection criteria isn't business. It's social engineering. And it won't stand." "The financial records suggest otherwise," I replied evenly. Under Hawthorne's stewardship, Oak Ridge has deteriorated from a premier institution to an unsustainable vanity project, teetering on insolvency. My ownership represents its only viable path forward. I opened the folder I'd brought with me, removing several documents. These are the forensic accounting reports documenting Theodore's financial mismanagement. They've been submitted to the appropriate regulatory authorities as required by law. I've also included the structural assessment identifying over 30 deferred maintenance issues that threaten Oak Ridge's operational viability. Harrison didn't take the offered papers. Whatever financial irregularities you've discovered, they can be addressed without dismantling the club's fundamental character. The Hawthorne family is prepared to inject significant capital in exchange for returning operational control to the traditional governance structure. It was a classic Harrison-Hawthorne maneuver, using financial leverage to reassert authority, while avoiding accountability for the conditions that had necessitated intervention. This time, however, he was negotiating from weakness rather than strength. That's a generous offer, I acknowledged. But it fails to address the underlying issues that led to Oak Ridge's current state. Financial recapitalization without cultural transformation would merely postpone the inevitable decline. Harrison's practiced business demeanor slipped, revealing the raw entitlement beneath. You think you can simply purchase your way into our world? That ownership grants you the authority to redefine institutions you barely understand? The Hawthorne name has stood for excellence in this community for 7 generations. What comparable legacy do you bring to this table? The question cut to the heart of our fundamental disagreement about what constituted genuine value and legitimate authority. It deserved a direct response. I bring the legacy of merit over inheritance, I said quietly. Of excellence defined by character and contribution rather than bloodlines and bank accounts. The legacy of every person who has earned their place rather than being born into it. Harrison scoffed. Platitudes and progressive talking points. Oak Ridge wasn't built on abstract ideals. It was built by specific families with specific values and traditions. You're right, I conceded. And many of those founding values were admirable: commitment to excellence, community responsibility, personal integrity. It's the subsequent distortion of those values to preserve power for a narrowing circle of insiders that has undermined Oak Ridge's purpose and sustainability. For a moment, Harrison seemed genuinely taken aback by my knowledge of the club's early history. Like many who inherited status rather than earning it, he had assumed his family's connection to Oak Ridge granted him exclusive understanding of its essence. Recovering quickly, he shifted tactics. James will never support this crusade against his family's legacy. You're forcing him to choose between his wife and his heritage, a choice with an inevitable outcome, given Hawthorne family loyalty. The implicit threat wasn't subtle. My marriage would be the collateral damage in this institutional power struggle. It was a calculation based on the Hawthorne assumption that I, like others they had encountered, would ultimately value social acceptance over principled action. That's James's decision to make, I replied, refusing to be baited into discussing my marriage as a negotiating point. But consider that true loyalty means wanting the best for someone, not merely their compliance. The Hawthorne family has demanded James's obedience without supporting his growth or recognizing his individual worth. That's not loyalty. It's ownership. Harrison's expression hardened. You've made a grave miscalculation, Olivia. This community operates through relationships and mutual obligations that transcend legal documents. When this conflict escalates, and it will, you'll find yourself isolated not just socially, but professionally and politically as well. I met his gaze steadily. Those threats might be more effective if I valued the approval of a system built on exclusion and inherited privilege. But my worth isn't determined by acceptance into your circles, Harrison. It never was. As our conversation concluded without the resolution Harrison had clearly expected to achieve, I recognized that we had reached the point where reconciliation was no longer possible. The Hawthorne family would deploy every resource to regain control of their social sanctuary, while I would proceed with transforming Oak Ridge into an institution worthy of its potential. The next 3 weeks unfolded exactly as anticipated. The Hawthornes mobilized their considerable influence in increasingly desperate attempts to undermine my authority at Oak Ridge. Harrison leveraged his banking connections to pressure vendors into demanding unfavorable payment terms. Theodore engaged his legal network to file nuisance lawsuits, challenging various operational decisions. Constance activated her social machinery to organize a membership protest that fell dramatically short of its participation targets. Each maneuver revealed the hollow nature of Hawthorne power, impressive in appearance, but ultimately dependent on others' willingness to comply with unwritten social rules. As those rules lost their enforceability, the family's influence diminished accordingly. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge's transformation proceeded steadily. The membership reforms generated an unexpected surge of interest from accomplished individuals who had previously considered the club inaccessible. The operational improvements boosted staff morale and service quality. Even the financial restructuring showed immediate positive results, as Elena Martinez implemented proper controls and transparent reporting. On a personal level, the consequences of my stand against the Hawthorne dynasty were significant but clarifying. James and I entered a separation that felt less like an ending than a recognition of a distance that had existed for years. My relationship with my in-laws moved from uncomfortable accommodation to open opposition, a change that, while painful, brought unexpected relief in its authenticity. 6 weeks after the Christmas dinner that had catalyzed this transformation, I stood on Oak Ridge's main terrace watching the sunset paint the winter sky in shades of amber and gold. The club hummed with activity behind me, a jazz trio playing in the main lounge, members engaging in animated conversations, staff moving with newfound confidence through spaces that increasingly reflected their contributions. Davis approached, with his characteristic professional discretion. "Ms. Park, the first meeting of the Community Outreach Committee is assembled in the Oak Room. Judge Porter asked me to inform you that they've adopted your proposal for the scholarship program." Unanimously, I nodded my appreciation. "Thank you, Robert. And how are the staff responding to the new healthcare benefits package?" His composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine emotion. "Overwhelmingly positive. Elena has been conducting information sessions to explain the improved coverage. Several longtime employees mentioned it's the first time they've felt truly valued by Oak Ridge leadership. This feedback mattered more than any financial metric or membership statistic. True institutional transformation began with the people who brought it to life daily through their work and commitment. As I turned to leave the terrace, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance. James looked simultaneously uncomfortable and determined, like someone preparing to navigate unfamiliar territory. "Olivia," he greeted me as I approached. "Do you have a moment?" We hadn't spoken in person since our separation began, communicating only through attorneys about practical arrangements. His presence at Oak Ridge, the epicenter of his family's opposition campaign, suggested this wasn't a casual encounter. "Of course," I replied, leading him to a quiet seating area away from member activity. James took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been thinking about what you said, about neutrality being an endorsement of the status quo, about the difference between loyalty and ownership." He met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years. You were right. The admission clearly cost him considerable effort. The Hawthorne family culture discouraged acknowledgement of error or vulnerability as signs of weakness. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn approval that was perpetually withheld," he continued. "Surrendering my judgment, suppressing my concerns, compromising my values, all to maintain my position within a system that diminished everyone involved, including me." His words echoed my earlier assessment so precisely that I wondered if he was quoting me directly. But his expression suggested genuine realization rather than strategic concession. "What changed?" I asked quietly. "Everything," he replied with unexpected certainty. Watching my family's response to losing control of Oak Ridge revealed patterns I'd normalized for so long I couldn't see them clearly. The manipulation, the entitlement, the fundamental belief that rules exist for others but not for Hawthornes. He gestured toward the club around us. "And then seeing what you've accomplished here in just 6 weeks, not destroying Oak Ridge's character as my family claimed you would, but revealing its potential when freed from artificial constraints. This evolution suggested a depth of self-reflection I hadn't witnessed in James since our early relationship, before the Hawthorne influence had systematically eroded his independence. "I've resigned from Hawthorne Industries," he announced. "I'm starting a venture capital firm focused on first-generation entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds, people with vision and determination, but without the connections that typically determine access to capital." The decision represented a complete break from the Hawthorne dynasty, professionally, financially, and philosophically. It was a declaration of independence as significant in its way as my purchase of Oak Ridge had been. "That sounds meaningful," I said sincerely, "and aligned with your actual values rather than inherited expectations." James nodded, a spark of genuine enthusiasm animating his features. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm making choices based on what I believe rather than what others expect. It's terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously." As we continued talking, I recognized that something fundamental had shifted between us. The artificial harmony of our marriage had been replaced by authentic communication between two individuals, reclaiming their authentic selves. Whether this evolution would lead to reconciliation or amicable separation remained uncertain, but either outcome would reflect genuine choice rather than social obligation. When our conversation concluded, James departed for a meeting with potential investors while I headed toward the Oak Room to join the Community Outreach Committee. As I crossed Oak Ridge's grand lobby, I passed the spot where Harrison had once directed me to check coats at a holiday gala, mistaking me for staff despite my designer dress and executive demeanor. The memory no longer carried its former sting. The dismissals and microaggressions I'd endured from the Hawthornes seemed like artifacts from a distant era, remnants of a power dynamic that had been fundamentally disrupted not just within Oak Ridge, but within myself. My watch, the same platinum timepiece I'd worn at Christmas dinner, caught the light as I reached for the Oak Room door handle. Once a private symbol of my professional success, it now represented something more profound. The moment I had decided that my worth would no longer be determined by those who lacked the wisdom to recognize it. As I entered the committee meeting, greeted by the diverse faces of members united by merit rather than heredity, I smiled at the perfect symmetry of the situation. The Hawthornes had spent generations ensuring Oak Ridge remained an instrument of exclusion, never imagining it could become a vehicle for the very transformation they feared most. They had called me the help at Christmas dinner, revealing not my subordinate status, but their own moral bankruptcy. In response, I hadn't merely purchased their country club. I had reimagined its purpose, reclaimed its potential, and redirected its considerable resources toward creating the more inclusive community they had dedicated their privilege to preventing. And in doing so, I had helped not just myself, but everyone the Hawthornes had deemed unworthy of full participation in institutions they considered their birthright, including, most surprisingly, their own son. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.